She then claimed that the strange person bit her on her neck and drank her blood. Hello, and welcome to the Midnight Monologue. I'm your host, Nick, and tonight we have two stories from the No Sleep subreddit. The first one is called At Dawn He Sleeps by Johan66. This is an odd story of what happened to me at 16 years old. It's been almost 10 years and I still can't explain what I saw or what happened to the people close to me. You see, my grandpa had recently passed away at 86 years old. He was a career military man that had seen the world twice over, but at the same time he'd seen his fair share of violence and bloodshed. I can't tell you how many times I would be regaled by shock and downright brutal stories. His death was a sad one that brought the community together. We mourned, laughed, and honored a man who lived his life serving his country. But it was after his death that strange things started to happen. I'll never forget the first night I awoke to the sound of screams. Everyone ran down the hall to my little sister's room, where she was sitting up in her bed. She was hyperventilating and told my mother that someone was in there with her. My mother sat down on the bed and held her close. She explained that it was probably just a nightmare and asked her what she saw. She explained to us that a man had snuck into her room. She said he walked over to her bedside and leaned over her. He held a long, bony finger over his lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. She then claimed that the strange person bit her on her neck and drank her blood. My mother almost laughed upon hearing this. She patted my sister on the back and assured her it was just a bad dream. But it was the next thing she said that caught us off guard. Not only did she argue that it was not a dream, but she knew the identity of the specter that attacked her. She said it was my grandfather, or that it looked like him. She told us he had glowing red eyes and cold, pale skin. She said her pain was real and that it was not a dream. While this was definitely strange, my mother tried to attribute it to an overactive imagination. My grandfather passed away only a few months ago, and that maybe her wound from the loss was still fresh. He was close to us, so maybe this was some form of grief. For the rest of the night, my sister slept with my parents. But this was only the start of many more strange happenings. The next morning, my mother woke up with a headache. With her eyes half open, she went into the bathroom. It was there we heard her scream bloody murder. The whole family raced to her side, where she was on her knees on the bathroom floor. "My neck!" she cried. "My neck! Something's there!" My father pulled her hair back, and sure enough, 2 pinhole dots were on the side of my mother's neck. Tears filled my little sister's eyes as she tilted her head to the side. The same 2 blood-red dots were on her neck as well. My mother scooped up my sister and held her close. I'll never forget the fear in the child's voice when she said, "It was Grandpa, wasn't it? I told you, he's trying to get us." We didn't have to ask if my mom had the same dream, as her face said it all. Dad, on the other hand, blamed the matter on bed bugs and assured them both he would have the house sprayed. As the week went on, every night my mom and sister would awake in hysterics, dreaming of a demonic version of my grandfather attacking them, holding that spot on their necks, writhing in pain. Over time, they started to fall ill. They had high fevers and both stayed in the bed all day. At this point, my father took them to the emergency room, hoping to find some answers, though only more questions would arrive. The doctor called the spots on their neck bug bites and said that their sickness was probably a bad case of flu or COVID. Back at home, my father and I were worried. He sprayed the house like he said and even burned their old bedding. It wasn't until my friend Carl came over that he offered his own thoughts. "This sounds like a case of vampirism," he said. Carl was what you would call a truther or conspiracy theorist. He believed all sorts of crazy stuff, and I guess vampires was one of them. I told him that he was insane, but he persisted. He explained that cases like this had happened before. A relative would pass away, and suddenly strange things started happening to the living. Plague spread around the villages, and victims reported having similar nightmares about the deceased. There were documented cases of things like this happening in Austria and Romania. And when I got to thinking, I'm sure my grandpa had been stationed at one of those places. So I decided to humor Carl and asked him what he suggested, but his idea would be downright nuts. My friend said we should go and dig my grandfather up, check out his body, and see if he's decaying or undead. I refused to hear anymore. There was no way we were doing something like that. But at the same time, we heard my little sister scream again, "Grandpa, leave me alone! Please stop hurting me!" Once again, we'd find her scared and in pain, with streams of blood oozing from the bite marks on her neck. My mom started crying and looked at me with terror in her eyes. What's going on? Why is this happening? She didn't understand why they were so sick and why their own father was haunting our family's dreams. It was at this point I got desperate, so I let Carl take the lead. We waited till almost dawn that morning and drove over to the cemetery. The sun was just now starting to come up over the horizon. Carl had ordered wooden stakes off of the internet, as well as anti-vampire garlic-scented cologne. Look it up. There was so much fog on the ground that we struggled to find the correct tombstone. Whenever we did, he passed me a shovel and ordered me to start digging. I told him there was no way I was doing that and pushed the shovel back at him. So I sat in the car watching my friend dig up my veteran grandpa's grave. This all felt so crazy, but we had no other choice. My family was sick and I feared for their safety. Part of me wanted to tell him to get back in the car and get out of there, but he waved me over, signaling that the deed was done. As I approached, the fresh earth was dug up, and my grandpa's casket was in full view. I hesitated as I went to open the lid, but we'd come this far. The least I could do was check. As I opened, I saw my grandfather, a man who fought all over the world for 30 years, a man who rocked me on his lap and told me stories. Now here he was, lifeless and in the ground, or so I thought. His skin was still pink even though he'd been buried for almost 10 weeks now. There wasn't a smell, and most peculiar of all was the area around his mouth. Dried blood stained his lips and streamed down his cheeks. Carl was surprised at first, but quickly handed me a wooden stake. "Well, do it," he ordered, but again, I hesitated. There had to be a logical explanation for this. Vampires weren't real, but here I was standing over a corpse with a freaking stake in my hand. I felt myself about to crawl out of the old man's grave, but just then, Carl and I smelled something strange. It was smoky, like something was burning. I didn't have time to process what it could be when Carl cried out, "Dude, he's on fire! Get out of there!" Sure enough, down by my grandfather's legs, a fire had started. I'm not sure how it happened, but I tried climbing out of the 6-foot deep hole. Before I could, my grandpa let out an ungodly screech. I looked down at him to see his eyes glowing red, and he grabbed me by the throat. He pulled me close and hissed, showing off a pair of razor-sharp fangs. I quickly slapped his hand away and slammed the stake into his chest. He cried out in pain as the flames traveled up his body. Carl gave me his hand and pulled me out of the grave. Within seconds, most of my grandpa's body was ablaze under the morning sun. We watched in disbelief as the man who raised me was turned to ash before our eyes. After a few minutes, there was nothing left of the old man, even though Carl guessed spot on. He was in shock. I don't think he actually thought we'd find a vampire. I couldn't believe it either. I remember pinching myself, hoping that I'd awake from this horrible nightmare. But it was all too real, and our problems weren't over yet. A woman passing by us, standing over the dug-up grave. She called the police, and we were arrested on the spot. They charged us with desecration of a corpse and ritualistic acts. The police looked at us like devil-worshipping freaks. We told them our story, but they refused to believe us. Carl and I were given a slap on the wrist due to the fact we were minors, community service, and fines our parents had to pay. The good news was that my mom and sister sprang back quickly. Within days, it was like nothing had ever happened. Be that as it may, they sent me to counseling for help with an overactive imagination. For the longest time, people steered clear of Carl and I. They even accused us of being Satanists, but we knew the truth, that we saved my family. There was never an explanation for how or why that happened to my grandpa. I'm still unsure if he was actually a vampire or something else. But the dat folklore blended with reality, and the unexplainable happened. This had been my first and hopefully last battle with the supernatural. I don't know about you, but that story, it's creepy. I'm not sure how true it is. There's no claims in the story stating whether it's true or not, but I read this story over and I thought it would be something that you guys would enjoy. Our second story is by Real Horror Hub, and it's titled My Most Terrifying Real Life Experience. I've never really told this story online because every time I think about it, I get the same uneasy feeling that I had that night. This happened about 6 years ago when I was coming back home from a friend's house. It was late, somewhere around 1 a.m., and I decided to take a shortcut through the quiet road that passed near a large field. I had walked that route dozens of times before, so I wasn't worried about it. The night was unusually silent. There were no cars, no dogs barking, not even the sound of insects. About halfway down the road, I noticed someone standing near the edge of the field. At first, I assumed it was just another person walking home, but as I got closer, I realized they weren't moving at all. They were just standing there, facing in my direction. Something about it felt wrong. I couldn't make out any details because it was dark, but I could tell the figure was unusually tall. I kept walking, trying not to stare. When I finally passed the spot where I had seen it, I glanced over and the figure was gone. I immediately stopped and looked around. There was nowhere it could have disappeared in just a few seconds. The field was open for hundreds of feet, and there were no trees or buildings nearby. I remember feeling a chill run through my body, but I convinced myself that I was tired and imagining things. Then I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough to hear on an empty road. I turned around expecting to see someone, but there was nobody there. The footsteps stopped the moment I turned. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. As soon as I started walking again, the footsteps returned. This happened 3 times. Walk, footsteps, stop, silence. At that point, I was genuinely scared. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The road behind me was completely empty. I started walking faster, and the footsteps seemed to match my pace. I didn't look back again. I just kept moving. When the house finally came into view, I felt relieved. I hurried to the front gate, unlocked it, and stepped inside before closing the gate. I looked down the street one last time. Someone was standing there. The figure was at the far end of the road, completely still. Even from that distance, I could tell it was unusually tall. What I remember most clearly is that it seemed darker than the darkness around it, almost like a shadow that didn't belong there. I slammed the gate shut and rushed inside. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I convinced myself that the fear had gotten the better of me, but later that day, my neighbor asked me a strange question. He said, "Were you outside late last night?" I told him yes. He looked uncomfortable and said he had been looking out of his window around 1 a.m. and had seen me walking down the road. Then he asked, "Who was that person following you?" I felt my stomach drop. I never told him about the figure. In fact, I hadn't told anyone. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Maybe there was a real person on that road. Maybe my mind filled in details because I was alone and tired. But I know one thing for certain. I wasn't imagining the footsteps, and according to my neighbor, I wasn't walking home alone that night. That story, it creeps me out. I love walking at night, getting a nice stroll in, clearing my mind. I don't know how I would react if I were in that situation. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Be sure to follow us on TikTok. It's midnight_monologue. We'll be posting new stories every Monday and Saturday. I hope you have a great and spooky day.